Hey everyone, and welcome to the Shared Cup podcast. This is episode 23, and today my guest Denise Arnoudse shares her story of losing her little girl to miscarriage. Denise shares what she learned about how to grieve in a healthy way and how she continues to honor her daughter each and every day. I'm Allison Liddick, and this podcast is for women who want to experience the overflowing love of Jesus Christ through our own stories. We pray that you are blessed by this message. Hello and welcome to the Shared Cup podcast. I am your host, Allison Liddick, and my guest today is Denise Arnoudse. Denise, thank you for coming.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm so excited to be here this morning.
Oh, I am glad to have you. We are grateful for your willingness to come on and share your story. I know it's going to be used in a mighty, mighty way. I know a lot of people have experienced something very similar to you. So I appreciate your obedience and stepping out in faith to share your story today.
Absolutely. I'm very excited to share and very humbled to get to share my story to help others.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it so much. Now, before we dive into your story, I want to give our audience the opportunity to get to know Denise a little bit. So why don't you share a little bit about who you are, what you do, things you enjoy, or anything else you feel led to share?
Absolutely. I am a mother of three beautiful boys, all under the age of 5. So it is a crazy, chaotic household over here.
Yeah.
I call it my beautiful chaos.
Nice. That's
I
good.
have I have an amazing husband who inspires me every day. And we live in Temple, Texas, which is between Austin and Waco, if people don't know where that is.
All right.
So it's hot and humid here and just generally really gross. Right now, highs of 100.
Oh, wow. Yes, that's hot.
I currently work for a bank. That's my day job. And obviously, I have a lot going on. I am that person that all my friends always go, "How are you doing everything?" And I just go, "I'm really not." I don't know how to say no always. I keep going, "Yeah, of course. Come on, bring it on. I can
Sure.
do
Right.
it." That's a little bit about my background. But what is also a part of my story, not jumping to my story, but just a part of it, I have lost a little girl. I miscarried her at 18 weeks. That has transformed my life. Her name was Halia Corrine. One of the reasons I bring it up now is because the times I hear things like, oh, boy mom life, you know what I mean? And I'm like, I am a boy mom, but you don't see the missing daughter who is
Yeah.
still part of me. I still have a little girl. I am not only a boy mom, but it is what the world sees,
Right.
that I am getting to raise 3 boys, but I don't get to raise my little girl.
Mm,
That's a big part of my life.
yeah.
And I know for those who have gone through this, for myself, I think of her every day. She is 100% part of everything I do. And she has transformed me completely as a mother. I am a different
Mm,
person. I am a better person. And so, one of the things that happens when you lose, first off, you go down to the very basics of your foundation. You are stripped of everything you used to be. It feels like you are just a complete new foundation. And I found myself having to go to God completely bare and just on my knees crying to him because I didn't even know who I was anymore. Everything that had been important to me was no longer important. Those early days, being a mother, I can relate to this, but I felt like I was just like one of my sons who would scream at the top of their lungs, "I hate you," and have a tantrum and just, lose control of themselves in this moment of emotions.
yeah.
And that's exactly how I felt. And in those moments when my children are completely losing control of who they are, I know that is actually the moment they need me the most. They need their mom to come hug them and say, I love you and I'm not going to leave your side. I'm here with you. And that is completely how I felt about God. I was screaming at him, I hate you. I can't understand why you did this to me. Why would you take my little girl? Most moms, I feel like their dream is to have a daughter. And we wanted 3 kids. That was what I always wanted, 3 kids. She was number 3. And to have the words, it's a girl, said moments after finding out that she had no heartbeat, I was completely broken because those words were supposed to be the greatest joy I'd ever heard.
Right.
It's a girl, but instead it was the greatest loss I had ever felt. I was so angry at God. How could you do this? I know you promised me a little girl and you took her. How could you take her? I remember struggling so much in those early days with bargaining with him about having another little girl, bargaining with him about you promised, you broke your promise. It took me a little time to see he hadn't broken his promise. He definitely followed through. I got a little girl. It just wasn't what I was looking for. It wasn't what I
Mm-hmm.
wanted. And so I had to rebuild everything I thought I knew about God and everything I thought I knew about my hopes and dreams. Once I came to terms that I really did have a little girl, I had to start sitting in the grief and really thinking about what does it mean to mourn a loss and what does it mean to actually go through this grief process. And one of the ways that I started to do that was, if I died tomorrow, how do I want my husband to grieve? How do I want my children to grieve? Do I want them to pretend I never existed because the pain is so great that they want to act like I wasn't even part of their lives? Do I want them to never heal or never live again?
Mm-hmm.
That they're so in pain that they can't move. And I really sat there and thought about it. I'm like, of course, as a mother, as a wife, that's not what I want at all. What I desire is for my children to find gratitude in the time they spent with me. My husband to take the good from our relationship and carry it on with him. To use that time spent with me to become a better person and to be grateful for having me part of their lives. And once I got to a place of that's how I want to be remembered, I chose to grieve my daughter the same way. And I chose to start looking for the beauty that was in my life because of her. I have a box that is her box that is strictly memorabilia from the hospital when I delivered her. But I also I received what's called a Hope Box from Hope Mommies, a beautiful organization for moms who have lost little ones through miscarriage or stillbirth or early infant loss.
Okay. What
I
was it
received
called?
this
Hope Mommies,
Hope
you said?
Mommies,
Okay. Thank
a
you.
beautiful organization that is nationwide, although they have chapters in specific locations. But you can receive a Hope Box anywhere in the United States, I believe.
That's great.
And at first, I thought I was going to collect things that were memories of my daughter. And then I realized this box wasn't made for my daughter. Although I want to give her the best, this
Mm-hmm.
box was made for me. And this box needs to contain all the beautiful things that have happened in my life since I had my daughter, the
Right.
changes that occurred, the friends I made,
Mm-hmm.
all these items and the growth I made. And so I collected my journals from after I lost her. I have memorabilia from my they have a retreat. Hope Mommies has their own retreat for moms. I have the items I received at the Hope Mommies retreat in that box. All these things that are beautiful reminders of who I have become because I get to be her mother.
Mm.
And so, although it wasn't it wasn't the way I wanted to have a daughter. I am a much better person getting to be her mother. And therefore, I would never change a minute of it, because I I wouldn't be who I am. And for that, I'm forever grateful for her. And I feel so blessed to be her mother, to get to share her story with others, and to get to sit in other stories because of
Yeah.
her. I never would have been able to do that. To sit in someone's grief is one of the hardest things you can do. And yet, it is one of the most important things. It is one of the greatest ways you can help someone heal, to sit with them. There is a singer, Krista Wells. She has this beautiful song. Going to forget what it was called, but it talks about, what can I bring to your fire? That's the main lyric. What can I bring to your fire as your roof is burning down? Shall I sing while the flames grow higher? It really speaks to the idea that I didn't need to be fixed. I didn't have a problem with me. I lost my daughter and I just needed to be heard as I was grieving. And so we, in our society, even as Christians, we have been taught to try to help people feel better.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think that's what Jesus taught us. I really looked, and I tried to look really hard at, what did Jesus teach us about grief? And when those around him were grieving, when Mary was grieving because Lazarus had died, he didn't belittle her grief. He didn't tell her, you stop that now, like, or, you know, well, look at the bright side.
Right.
Let's find all the good from this moment. He wept with them. He cried. He came into their grief and sat with them and listened. And that is what being a Christian should be about. I don't believe everyone has been called to sit in someone else's grief. Some of us just aren't called to it. I understand it's very hard, but you can still do things for people that will not hurt them further in their grief. Like, if you are someone who is service oriented, you can bake them something, cook them food. If you are a gifts person, you can provide them with a blanket that just will wrap them during that time of feeling so empty and unloved, and like, one of the images that always came to me, I felt like this wounded animal during my grief, and that was how the world saw me, as a wounded animal that they pitied. And I don't believe that this is how we should feel, or this is how the world should see us. And so, to provide love for people during this time, instead of trying to make them feel better and fix them, but to come alongside them, you are doing more good than anything you can ever imagine. And not only that, but you are providing them Christ in this moment. You are sitting with them. And I cannot tell you how incredibly meaningful it was when people just sat and didn't even say a word to me, but
Mm-hmm.
just listened as I cried.
Yeah.
And so,
And so just thinking of you in that situation where you had just found out and you had some people that just sat with you, what are
yeah.
some things that people said or did that wounded you more? Because you said that was powerful when you said
That is
that.
very powerful.
You said there are things people do that wound you more. So what are things? Because honestly, I feel like some people that have never been in that situation, it's not their heart to do it.
Yes,
But like you said, they're just trying to make you feel better and unintentionally maybe
absolutely.
hurting you more. So give us some examples of what not to say.
Yes, God has a plan. That's a very painful one. One of the reasons that is so very painful for someone who is just lost is, you are telling this person that God did this. He killed your child. I don't believe that seeing God in the light of a baby killer is a good thing.
Right.
That's not a God I want to live, that is going and taking children from their mothers. I don't believe that's what God did. It doesn't mean that you can't make beauty from the ashes. I know I just quoted a song.
Yeah.
I can't even remember which song, but I do believe that beauty can come from the pain, but I don't believe God did that to you specifically to try you, to to see how much you could handle. You're probably hearing some of those cliche things right there, like,
Right.
yeah, you're God thought you were strong enough, or God needed another angel. That's another one I've heard. You can always have more children. I've heard that one.
Mm.
You're young. Yes, that may be true. That's still a life that I
Right.
lost.
Right.
It's usually when people are trying to actively change how you are feeling. And so, one of the things that I have really tried to study for myself is, why am I saying something? Check your motives behind what you're saying. Are you trying to make this person feel better because you can't handle the way they are feeling? And one of the best ways I can describe this is with children, because they are so amazing at pointing out all of our humble flaws.
They sure are.
But I can tell you that when my son is crying, if I tell him, brush it off, it's okay, it's not a problem, not a big deal, there's no reason to cry, normally he doesn't handle that very well. It normally causes him to get more anxious
Yeah.
and more upset, because for him, I just told him, what you are feeling is not real. It's not true. Your feelings are making me uncomfortable, and we
Yeah.
need to fix them. And I need you to
Yes.
fix them.
Mm.
And so when you are talking to someone who has gone through something and they are in grief, are you saying something to try to fix their feelings? Or are you empathizing with them and sitting with them in their grief? Are you coming in and just saying, I am here.
Mm.
I'm willing to listen to you. I'm willing to sit. I know as women, especially, we want to fix things. We want to make people feel better.
Yeah.
If you're a mom, you want to heal your child's scraped knee, kiss it, put the band aid on it. But when it comes to grief, that doesn't work. The best way to help someone heal is to let them feel it and let
Mm.
them to express what they are feeling. If you get in a situation where your emotions are taking over and you need to get out, it is better to say to them, I love you. I have something to do right now, but I am praying for you. You can text me if you need me. I am still here. That's important. Even if it's a phone call, if you don't know what to say, don't say anything. I'm sorry for your loss is a great thing to say. I personally don't like this one, but I've been told that some people do. I can't imagine what you're going through. For me, I felt more isolated when people said this. Like, I feel very alone. Nobody understands what I'm going through.
Yeah.
Some people really are more bothered, though, by when people try to relate, because then it feels like they are either belittling what they've gone through by saying that, well, we've all been there,
Yeah.
or they feel like whenever someone is relating, they're just like, you really don't know what I'm going through, though. You really can't understand. And saying that you do is just making me feel like somehow you're just not connecting the dots, that my child has been lost.
Yeah.
And so,
I feel like so I've experienced that or witnessed it as well, and I kind of feel like when people do that where they're trying to relate a scenario that they've gone through that's similar, it's kind of just like shifting the focus off of you and onto them, and can
yes,
almost, I would say, hurt a little more because it feels like they don't truly care about what you're saying. They're just trying to shift it. And so it's
yes,
almost like using the words
yes,
of, well, it's not that bad. Like, here's what I went through. You know what I mean? So
yes.
I could
Yes.
see that.
Yeah, no, that actually is exactly what happens. It also, in that same tone, when you shift it like that, you are no longer giving space for someone to go through the process. I just recently saw someone who had lost their brother, and people were starting to say things like grief heals with time, give it time, you'll feel better later. And once more, that's not very helpful in this
Right.
moment because time doesn't magically go faster.
Right.
We do want it to happen. I'll say when I was going through my loss, I wanted to go through the 7 steps of grief. I was just like, I got to get through these steps. I got to get to the acceptance. I really tried so hard to be the perfectionist at grief and go through the process. And the further along I got, the more I realized there's no end. Grief doesn't have an end point. You don't get to a finish line one day where, hooray, I'm done, I made it. No such thing. And unfortunately, as a society, that is what we think there is. The day I got pregnant with our third boy, it was actually a month after I lost Talia. I was still very in the midst of my grief when I got pregnant with him. And I remember how extremely challenging it was as people almost forgot about my daughter because now I was pregnant again.
Yes.
He was my rainbow baby. And I've used the term rainbow baby as well, but this term sometimes hurts some women because it provides this image of a baby that has somehow replaced the storm that you went through, that the storm is gone. It's a rainbow now. And Caleb, my little 10-month-old, he definitely did not replace my daughter.
Right.
He wouldn't be here though if I hadn't lost her, which is a hard place for him to be as a son who, as he's growing up, will know he could not physically be here. I should have still been pregnant with his sister, but instead I was pregnant with him. He shouldn't be here, and yet he is. And that has entwined him with his sister for the rest of his life. When I see Caleb, I would give everything for him. But that doesn't change the fact that I would also give everything for his sister. It is a complicated situation. I love his sister with all my heart, and I wish with all my heart she was here. What I wouldn't do to have her back. At the same time, I would do anything and everything for my son, who wouldn't be here without having lost his sister.
Right.
It is so complicated. And so when you are trying to comfort somebody who is going through grief, you do need to realize that the little things you say, it is so complicated. And when you're talking to them about the loss and the excitement of a new baby, for instance, they're still going to grieve the baby they lost. There's still a life that they no longer get to see on a daily basis, get to grow up and hold them and kiss them. I actually feel incredibly blessed because Halia was 18 weeks, which means for me, I felt her kicking. I felt her very early at 12 weeks. She was so active, and I actually kind of termed her secretly my little sassy one because she was just so active. Every time I laid down, she woke up and was so very active. And after we lost her, I thought about all the things that I wanted to do with my daughter, what I would have done, and all the losses. I call them the cascading losses because you don't lose just one thing, you lose a lifetime of things. I didn't get to rock her to sleep at night or read her bedtime stories or kiss her. But yet I started to realize as I prayed, and I was so angry at God during those times, I started to realize I did a lot of those things without realizing it. I would rock her to sleep while I was rocking my middle son in the room that she would have been in. I got to do that. I got to read books to her. It just wasn't the way I wanted to do it.
Right.
But God gave me those opportunities. And I started to find gratitude in those moments that I got to do. When I was pregnant with her, my husband and I actually went to a wedding in Seattle. And I was very, very early, 6 weeks. We went on this beautiful hike, Mount Rainier. If anyone knows it, it was gorgeous. And one of the things that I hold so dear is that was her vacation that she got to go. We got to travel with our daughter. It wasn't, I don't have pictures of me holding a sweet baby girl on vacation, but I do have pictures of me in this beautiful location with her inside me and getting to take her on this beautiful place. And those became the things that I got to thank God for, these moments with my daughter. One of the other things, I can't even fully describe how incredibly grateful I am, is that her pregnancy, because it was supposed to be my last, I decided that I was really, really going to enjoy it because I don't like being pregnant. And so I actually really tried to be present in every moment. And I can't thank God enough for that. Because it ended up, that was the only time I had with her, that those 18 weeks were all I got with her on this side of earth. And I loved every minute of being pregnant with her. And so when I looked back, I realized that I loved her in the absolute best way I could. She had a beautiful life that every minute spent, I was in awe of her. And so it really changed my perspective on life. And it really has altered my entire future. And so I believe that we as a society feel like we need to have a hierarchy in grief. It's almost like a competition of who's allowed to grieve and who's not. And I've seen it with countless mothers who've lost, and I believed it as well. I felt very, very upset that Halia was not 20 weeks, because at 20 weeks, medically speaking, she would be considered a stillbirth, but I was 18 weeks. So on my chart, it said that I miscarried. And I felt like those words automatically meant that she was less somehow than a stillbirth. Now I look back and I'm so grateful for it, because when I tell people I miscarried, the stories that I hear, people feel like they can tell me, because miscarried means I did that as well. That's what happened with me.
Right.
When I first lost her, you've already heard me talk about Hope Mommies. I went to a Hope Mommies meeting very early on, and I came in already with the idea that my story was incredibly high on the hierarchy because I was 18 weeks, and most people lose earlier than that. Therefore, I am somehow allowed to grieve more. And I walked into this meeting and I met two different moms, one who lost her son, he was a little over a year old, and another mom who lost her daughter full term stillbirth. And I immediately felt I was no longer on the hierarchy. I was beneath their hierarchy. I started to feel guilty for grieving, because their stories were obviously more, they had more right to grieve. How dare I grieve in their presence? And that's not how they treated me. They listened to my story with so much love and compassion, wanted to hear everything, and never once judged me for what I was going through. There was another mom there who had miscarried at 8 weeks. Of course, I just talked about the hierarchy. I obviously had more right to grieve than she did. And she knew the number of days since she'd miscarried. Her grief was so palpable, and I was ashamed of how I'd felt and humbled at the fact that her grief was so real, and that night was the first time I realized grief is not a comparison game. The phrase comparison is the thief of joy. It's also the thief of many things, including grief. And I no longer compared my grief after that, because I saw that all grief matters, from the little to the great. And so, of course, I've been talking about the grief of losing a child, but there are a lot of people out there grieving right now. They don't even know it. Many of them are trying to see the silver lining. But right now, our nation is in grief. COVID has completely altered our lives, and so much of what we love is no longer here. No matter if you feel like you are living your life the same way or you have completely gone into isolation, there is still grief everywhere because the world doesn't look the same. That is grief. When you have that change, that you're sad, you want it to go back. And being able to acknowledge that grief is the way that you can actually heal. And I don't even like saying the word heal, because it once more implies that there's an end destination. But just like when you get a really bad cut and you scar, that's what this will be. It'll always be there. Those seniors who didn't get to walk across the stage for graduation or go to prom, those mothers who, when they go into the hospital and they're delivering their baby, but the procedures are completely different now, and they may not get to hold their child immediately or have the entire family visit them like they thought they would. That grieving, we're all experiencing it in different ways. And if we as a nation, as a entirely human race, could come together and just say, I hear you, I see you, I want to sit in your grief with you and listen, we would find a world that Jesus meant us to have.
That's powerful. You said quite a few really good things right there that I just want to point out. One, there is no hierarchy to grief. Two, we need to allow ourselves to grieve and stop comparing our grief or lessening our grief with someone else's. And then another thing that you just mentioned as well is we also need to be sensitive that grief has many forms and looks very different for people, and be able to be there and sit. And like you said before, less is more when it comes to words.
Yes.
And we have to know, like you said, if as as women and some men feel like we can fix things with the words that we say, and that's absolutely not true. I love you and being there. So we need to learn how to be good listeners and just, I hear you and I love you. Thank you for sharing that. And what is something that you have learned about yourself, or something that you've learned about how God sees you through this?
So some things that I have learned about myself, well, I definitely learned that I was not the best listener before. I very often, and I believe this is most people, I would listen, but I was always actively trying to come up with my next comment, or I wasn't a great active listener. The best examples I can give is whenever, not going into full politics here, but right now we are in a nation that's very divided in politics. And I think one of the reasons that is because when we listen to someone who has different views than ourselves, we don't listen. We're looking for, how can I debate you about why you're wrong? We didn't really hear them.
Right.
We don't want to really hear them. And I think the same sometimes with Christians, especially evangelical, we sometimes are so concerned about spreading the word that we can't hear the other person that we're trying to talk to. We don't sit and listen to their story. One of my favorite Bible stories is when Jesus meets the woman at the well. To me, that story is the epitome of evangelical teaching, because he went to where she was.
Yeah.
He didn't call her to come to him. He went and met her. When he was talking to her, he really listened to what she was saying. I believe he really didn't judge what she was saying either. He just spoke to her in truth. It doesn't mean, though, that he was going, well, you have a bunch of husbands. How dare you?
Right.
He just said it. And because he was able to listen to her and meet her where she was, she followed him and became evangelical herself.
Mm-hmm.
That is the way that God has called us to spread his word and love, by action first. And that action is by listening, by sitting with people and going to them, not expecting them to come to us. And so another story I have that relates to this is I had a friend who was not Christian, and I was driving her home from college one day, back to our hometown. And she told me about how she had been approached by a Christian table in our student center. And they started asking her, "Are you saved?" And she said, "No." And at some point, they said, "You know that you will go to hell if you don't believe in Jesus." I can tell you that did not bring her closer to Jesus. It hurt her profusely and obscured the message that Jesus has for us. She wasn't able to listen to them because they weren't listening to her. And so on this car ride, I listened to her. I told her that's not the Jesus I know. And I told her my story. And I really sat and listened to her. Now, do I know if she became Christian? I don't. But at least I know that she got to hear the Jesus and God I believe in, the one who truly loves her and isn't passing judgment on her, but just wants to be in relationship with her.
Yeah. That's good.
So,
That's good. So you learned how to be a listener through all of it.
yes,
That's good.
yes, yes.
And then how about, because I know you said you were kind of mad at God through everything.
Yes.
What changed there with your relationship with God, and were there any scriptures that helped get you through that?
Yes. Well, one thing that really helped me was believing that it was okay to have righteous anger, that Jesus had that as well. We saw him have righteous anger when he overturned the tables in the temple,
Mm-hmm.
when they were selling product in God's house. He was very angry. I felt it was okay through that scripture to tell God how angry I was and how hurt I was. I also felt like he was able to come alongside me because I was honest with him. I was bearing
Yeah,
my soul at that moment,
that's good.
the absolute rawness of my pain. I was able to show him exactly how I was feeling. And because I was able to do that, he was able to comfort me. And there are other Bible verses that helped me. For instance, my personal favorite has always been Matthew 28:20, which is, "I am with you always, even to the end of the ages." That has always been the one that has stuck with me since I was a little girl. I also felt a new love for the psalm, the one about, "I knit you in your mother's womb."
Yeah.
Because I started to realize not only did he first know that my daughter, before I even did, he knew her at the moment of conception, and he knew the moment that she passed away. He was
Yeah.
with her through it all because I couldn't actually be there. I didn't know what was happening. I didn't know she had passed away or what she was going through, but he was able to comfort her.
Mm-hmm.
And so that also helped me through my grieving process, that he wept for her just as I did.
Mm-hmm.
And that is definitely in scripture where Jesus wept for his
Yeah.
friend.
Yeah.
Knowing that I had a God who felt all the things I was feeling allowed me to grieve properly and to have a healthy grief. And so another Bible verse, although I'm really going to leave it with people to think about, that really altered the way that I read the Bible even and think on stories, is the story that we've all heard. It's a pretty common one, I think, even in more secular terms. Solomon and the two women, where one has lost her baby and the other has hers, and they're arguing over whose child it is.
Mm.
We have always villainized the mother who lost her child. And in those moments, because we have placed right and wrong and placed judgment on this moment, we never saw the mother who lost her child. We never heard her story or listened or actually sat in the grief that she was feeling, which was immense.
Yeah.
Instead, we just judge her as, how dare you say, kill this child? The heartache she was going through at that moment was unbearable. And we need to listen to people and quit placing so much judgment.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you for sharing that story. I think that's one that people just kind of skip right through, or like you said, they are doing what you just said. So thank you for referencing that. Now, I do want to talk about, because I know that you have created a space. I want to talk about the 2 websites that you have, if you don't mind. So why don't you start with Gracious Grief?
Yes, I created a website that I have been allowing people a safe place to grieve, called Gracious Grief. This website is for any type of grief, whether it is grieving over the changes of COVID or you have lost someone dear you love. I will not judge. This community is not about judgment. We are all here to acknowledge that grief is hard and we want to do it together and we want to listen. So I share stories on there. I allow people space to share what they are going through to help others. I also share some insight into how to grieve in a healthy way, because that's one of the hard things. We're not taught the process.
Right. Yeah.
And there really is some things that you need to do to help yourself to grieve instead of, it's called complicated grief. There are many people who go through it. One of the best ways that I can describe it is the people, for instance, who they go to 2 extremes. Either they pretend it never happened, so then they cause themselves grief, and you will physically manifest problems later because your body does an amazing job of mirroring what's internally happening.
Yeah.
So those who go through complicated grief by not acknowledging the grief, they will manifest the grief in other ways. And there's also the other extreme of those who are unable to find healthy ways of grieving, and they just stay in that low spot permanently and they can't see a way out.
Yeah.
And so this is a place that hopefully gives you the ability to take those next steps. And I'm also working on writing a journal that's going to be a 6-week journal that helps you to navigate the grief in a healthy way, based on research, and it will be a secular journal, because one of the things that I have felt very called to is to speak to all of the God's people. If people ask me, why do you do Gracious Grief? That's my intro into my calling as a Christian. But I believe God has called me to evangelize by my actions first. And so this journal will be for anyone, no matter what you believe, and will help you through the healthy process of going there and in a safe place. And so that's Gracious Grief. I also have a different blog that's called Technically Denise. It's gone through several iterations as I've tried to navigate what is God calling me to do, as many women can probably relate. But I have started to really feel very called and passionate about the idea of empowering yourself, especially through listening, and the incredible changes that can happen to yourself, to others, by the power of listening. Because I think that especially what we're not taught when we think of listening, we think of listening to others, but we're just not very good at listening to ourselves either. And I mean, the best example is right now, if I'm actually going to listen to myself, my body's saying I'm hungry. It says, go eat lunch. But, sometimes as mothers, we're like, well, we don't have time, so we don't listen. And then we put ourselves in a situation where we're not our best selves. So we can't listen to others because we didn't even take care of ourselves. And so this blog is about how can you become that best person so that you can be the change you wish to see in the world. That's one of my
really
favorite ones.
Yes, I love that.
So,
Perfect.
and I'm trying to write a book about it. It's coming along. It is coming along, but it's going to be about how to be the change through listening to yourself first and then listening to others.
That's so good. That's exciting. Good for you.
Yeah,
Taking action.
thank you.
So your two sites, so graciousgrief.com and technicallydenise.com. So check that out.
Yes,
And
ma'am.
then also, if you are willing, if somebody wanted to talk to you more, maybe they've had a similar experience as you,
Yes,
are you willing to chat with someone?
absolutely. I am always willing to talk to anyone who's gone through it and needs someone to listen
Okay.
because that is so important. So please reach out to me. You should never grieve alone. You should always find someone.
So what's the best way for them to get in touch with you? Would it be email?
You can email me at technicallydenise@gmail.com.
Okay,
That is
perfect.
one way you can reach me. I'm also on Instagram. I'm on Facebook. And those are all, if you search Technically Denise, you should find me.
Perfect. That's good. You make it easy on us. Thank you.
Yes.
Well, thank you again for sharing your story with us today. Is there anything else you want to say to our audience before we call this podcast a wrap?
The last thing I will say, not all of us can do great things, but we can do small things with great love. And that would be
Mm,
Mother Teresa. We can all make a difference in this world. And great, small, they all mean something to God. So just put your heart and soul into it.
that's a great quote. Thank you for sharing that. It's also a
Yes.
great way to end this episode. But thank you again, Denise, so much for sharing your story. I think this is a great tribute for your daughter as well. So thank you for
Thank
stepping out and
you.
sharing and helping people see that we all need to grieve and stop discounting people's grief. Be there with them and learn to listen. So I appreciate everything that you shared today and all of the advice that you gave. So thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much for letting me come and share.
Yes, absolutely. And to all of our listeners, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. Leave Denise a comment and just let her know that you appreciate her coming on and sharing her story today. And make sure that you tune in next Thursday at 9 a.m. for another release of the Shared Cup podcast. But Denise, thank you again. Thank you for joining us today for the Shared Cup podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and remember that each one of us has a story that shows the overflowing love of God. If you want to be a guest on our podcast, put a comment below and we'll send you the link to apply. Have a blessed day and thank you so much for joining us.